My guest today is Troy Van Leeuwen, a guitarist whose name is known by musicians across the globe. And he has appeared on the albums of many different bands, including Korn, Cold Chamber, and Deadsy, and Crazy Town, and A Perfect Circle. And Troy stayed with the Perfect Circle for an album and a half before taking the second guitarist position with Queens of the Stone Age on the Songs of the Death tour. And Troy is also a writer and film music composer, and he composed the music for the feature sci-fi film Roswell Delirium, and he was a musician on a Minecraft movie and has writer credits on shows like Entourage and Saw 2, as well as Californication, Anthony Bourdain, Peaky Blinders, and The Grand Tour, and that's just to name a few. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome guitarist, writer, and film composer Troy Van Leeuwen to the show. Welcome, Troy.
That was quite an introduction. Thank you. Yeah, you've done some homework.
well, you're
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so
well,
much
you're
for
quite
having me.
famous on the global scale, because of the tremendous success of Queens of the Stone Age. I even had to look it up that even on Spotify, still those songs are still spinning 7 million times a month.
I mean, we're doing well. It's really. I keep saying how fortunate I am, and our band is. When it comes to our continued, popularity, success, I guess, over the last 25 years. So we're lucky. Things are getting harder and harder in this industry. And so every day I'm always thanking my lucky stars.
Yeah, I mean the music industry has changed quite a bit in the last 25 years, hasn't it?
It seems to be changing like every 18 months, kind of like I don't know what the law is called, but there's a law in like uh, in the computer world where processing basically doubles every 18 months, and it seems like about that same time is when it gets harder and harder for a musician to make a living. Every time that processor speed like doubles, our
Well, yeah,
checks cut
well,
in
yeah,
half almost.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of like film equipment and camera equipment. It seems to change every 6 months, and by the time you buy something, it's already out of date. And
Pretty much.
yeah, and with the music industry, I mean, with Queens of the Stone Age, here you are 25 years later. Do you feel more like an independent artist because of the way things have changed?
Well, I would say yeah. Short answer. There's a lot of we used to be on a major label, Universal, and then when that contract ended, we joined up with a more independent label called Matador, which they have an incredible roster of great artists that have sort of the same, I guess. I'm trying to think of the word. It's like credibility, I guess. Um, but so we did a deal with them, which was beneficial for both of us. So we maintain all the creative control, and we have to you know it's one thing about being in a rock and roll band. You have this people have this idea that you're just I know I'm wearing sunglasses and in a dark room, but we have to be on top of our game with the business too. So it's a pretty hard tightrope to walk, but somehow we manage it. And yeah.
Well, I went through your resume on IMDb and I was looking through all of the writer credits, and you co-wrote on the Queens of the Stone Age song Little Sister. That song has gotten a lot of mileage on numerous shows. Why is that song so popular as a music score or maybe as a music bed?
Well, I think that when that song came out, it was 2005, I believe, and we were so there's these little for me what I've noticed there's these little sort of events in the music industry where say for example a perfect circle that was one of the last like giant signings of a label, that had lots of money behind it. That was on Virgin. We got David Fincher to direct our video, and the budgets were crazy, and that was the right before MP3s sort of came out, and so that part of time, there was this big wave of like, we were able to sell millions of records, and by the time the MP3 came out, and like the iPod, and music was being stolen basically in our eyes, from Napster. So there was another sort of spot in time, which was 2005. I remember there was still like a lot of terrestrial radio, like K Rock here in Los Angeles. So all those stations were still playing songs, rock's music, and spinning a lot. And so that gave it's sort of like it's what we call an earworm. Once you start hearing it as much as you do, and that it's like it just becomes part of the rock and roll culture. And so that song was kind of one of our songs that still had radio behind it, and we were still touring, doing all the big festivals, and we do a lot of business over in Europe, and the great thing about the European audiences is they stick with you. They stay with you over the years, and we're in America. It's pretty fickle. We keep taking two steps forward and one step back. But so that song, I would say, was in that sort of magic moment where there was still rock radio on our side.
Yeah, there was many years ago I produced and co-directed a heavy metal guitar show here in Houston for television. And it was very popular, and then we would talk to so many of the rock bands, the metal bands, and they would tell us that they go to Europe and they have this huge, strong fan base. And that's
Yeah.
where they make their money for the year. And they said, we only come to America. We don't make money here. We're only doing it for the fans. So is that what it comes down to now?
I mean, I think that we have a little bit more. The good thing about our band is we have been around for so long, and we've had our original fans have kids, and their kids like us too. So we have a newer generation, which is healthy for our popularity here, and the sales that we do in America. But like I said, in Europe, we've just been on this steady climb of like, over 25 years. Now we're headlining some of these festivals instead of playing at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's been exciting, and I mean, we're still doing good in the States. It's just not as good as maybe over there, or Australia. So it's a constant, source of let's do more work here in the States. We'll tour more, So we've been working on it, working on our audience here, and it's still sort of paying off.
So is it harder because of the fact that the number of radio stations have changed formats here in America?
I just think you mentioned Spotify earlier, and I just think things are constantly in flux. Yes, there still is radio here, but people start looking at your spins, or your plays on Spotify, and that really, that's the new currency, I guess. And
Yeah,
honestly,
not
what we
not a
have
whole lot,
to do,
not a whole lot of currency in that, is there?
I know. I mean, it's meaning that's the currency of like the of the song being played that much doesn't turn into the currency of like putting cash in your pocket. Yeah, um, but it's what we have. It's what we do now, and I wish there were you know more advocates for musicians, and artists to have more control over how they get paid when it comes to their intellectual property. It's a whole issue that I just think about every day, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. um, but I think someone should help or step up, or I'd like to know if there's any kind of movement, in that realm where we
Well,
artists get more help.
well, yeah, there needs to be, because just in the past 2 weeks, you take the film industry, for example. Texas just signed a $1.5 billion tax incentive for filmmakers. California up theirs to 750 million. Georgia has an unlimited film commission. New Oklahoma, Louisiana, New Mexico has jumped in the fray. And so we do need more advocates for the music industry, because in the end, the artist as well as the songwriters are getting screwed.
Pretty much,
That's the
yeah.
only way to put it.
I totally agree. And I mean, we still do it because that's what we do, but it just doesn't feel fair. And and it means we have to work harder, and we have to think smarter in order to make those, to make those connections happen. And I'm not complaining about it. Like I said, we're doing good with the Queens. When it comes to Roswell Delirium, I mean, there was no budget. It was an opportunity to get my feet a little more wet into actually being a composer and seeing what I could do. And my my experience in that world is really limited. Me and Joshua Homme and Michael Schumann from the Queens, we did a score for a movie called In the Fade, which is a German movie, which there was a little bit of budget there, and that was a lot of fun to do. And just getting my feet wet doing that, I wanted to do more. And so when it comes to something like Roswell Delirium, um, yeah, it was all about just the art.
Well, yeah,
And
because I actually went back and listened to parts of the soundtrack that you wrote or co-wrote for In the Fade. And what amazed me was that film alone was a multiple award-winning film, even at Cannes. I mean, this film was huge for in 2017. And so I went back to listen to some of the clips that you wrote for that film. So that kind of sets you up for Roswell Delirium.
well, it just, for me, in my mind, it just felt like I would like to do more of that because it's such a, you're not in the driver's seat. The director is really, I mean, Rick Bakewell had a really great list of references that he had for me for pretty much every scene that he wanted music. And it was really helpful for me to go, oh, I see what you want here. And then I was able to create something out of, just hearing a reference from other movies. And it just took me out of the whole, like, being in a band and having to work with five other individuals and expressing yourself and trying to make sure that your voice comes off correctly. To me, it was almost like a nice break from all of that, ego, and just kind of fit music to a scene and try to make it better. It's a different experience, and I really enjoyed it. And honestly, um, I met so Glenn Evans is the producer on the movie. He's actually acting in it too. But I met him at um, it was a core event. So Sean Penn has he has an organization called Core, and they work in the Ukraine, and they did a bunch of work here during the pandemic. And so Glenn came up to me out of nowhere. He's like, "Oh, you're Troy. You play in the Queens and Perfect Circle." And he's like, I'm a real big fan. And he's like, yeah, I just came back from Ukraine and I shot a bunch of, film for Sean over there. And it was like in a war zone. I was like, oh my God, that's so intriguing. And I just mentioned to him, well, if you ever need music for any kind of film, just let me know. Lo and behold, about a year and a half later, he called me to do this. Before, I mean, it was already mostly shot, but they were looking for, composer. And I just happened to have enough time to do it. I mean, I was doing it on my laptop on a bus and in hotel rooms across the world, and that helped too with sort of the inspiration. But I didn't have a budget to hire strings, orchestra or anything like that. So I really had to get creative within some of the music production software that we have these days, which is pretty incredible.
Well, yeah, I mean, you won 3 awards for Best Original Score for Roswell Delirium. And did you did you did you have to read the script beforehand, or Rick already had a lot of footage already filmed in which you watched to kind of get an idea on how to create the music? And I'm sure, like you said, Rick gave you some examples. And what were those examples?
Well, to go back to the beginning of your question, so yes, there was a script, and by the time I was like, what, page 20, he already had a rough cut of the movie, and I was like, I'm just going to put the script away because I needed to see what's going on visually. So I had a rough cut, and I think there were 2 other cuts after that, so there wasn't too much changing going on. Uh, so yeah, and like honestly, some of the references are pretty crazy. Of course, John Williams. You're like, music from the ET. Like there's no way I'm gonna get anything to sound like this. So just put that out of your mind. And we were kept talking about the time frame was in the it was in the 80s, and it was a lot easier for me to just go, listen, this would be better with something like John Carpenter or something that had a lot of synth that was really popular back then. So I've used a lot of synthesizers for this movie just to capture that 80s sort of feel and sound. But yeah, there's Hans Zimmer, time, and stuff from Interstellar, and like I'm like, dude, I'm this is way out of my league. Um, but I could get the sense of what he wanted out of some of those references, and I was able to make something that really fit the mood as well. So he was shooting for way up here, and I was like, I'm shooting for right here.
Well,
um,
I think for the 1980s reference, probably what, Close Encounters?
there was a little bit of Close Encounters. Um, I was starting to recommend, a lot of John Carpenter, like The Thing, and The Fog, and you know,
Oh, The Fog.
just
I saw
The
that at the
Fog.
drive-in.
Did you? Yeah, I saw it in the theaters. That was a great movie.
Wasn't that
But
Adrian Barbeau?
I I believe it. Wait,
Isn't that
you may be
Adrian
right.
Barbeau was in The Fog?
Yes,
I,
yes,
wow, what a
yes,
memory that is. I think
yeah.
I was in high school. That had to be 1980.
Probably 80 or 81. Yeah,
And that was a
somewhere
good
around.
movie.
Good movie. Yeah. I still look at that movie, like also like Warriors, some of the music in that movie was really kind of, you know, kind of rock forward, but so yeah, yeah, and we all agreed on like Ferris Bueller's Day Off and stuff like that, and especially with some of the cast, excuse me, you've got all these people that were really popular in the 80s, and it just really gave me this sort of like, oh, I've got to almost recreate, the facts of life theme, with some, with some changes here and there. But it was really fun to kind of go back there because I grew up in the '80s and I remember all that stuff. So
Well, yeah, when because when he had cast Reginald Vell Johnson, and everybody remembers him from Family Matters, I was like, no, he was the cop in Die Hard. That's how
Die
I
Hard.
remember him.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it
So
was a
I
real
just
fun
loved all
project.
the '80s. No, go ahead, Troy.
Yeah. No, I was just saying it was a real fun project to be a part of because all those kind of references again, it was like, oh, I'm kind of going back to my youth, and listening to stuff that, back then, all the music from that era, was the MTV, boom, and there was so much synthesizer everywhere. I didn't play one guitar on the score, by the way.
Well, no, because I went back yesterday just to listen to the music score. And it's like you said, you have to be heavy on the synthesizer. When you're talking about the 1980s, I mean, that was probably like the biggest instrument that everybody was using at the time. And so it just fits. And then when we think about new sci-fi films, we still get that idea, but I think maybe with some of the new films, they're probably leaning more towards a manipulated orchestra, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. I listened to a lot of scores, especially for horror, there's a lot of just straight up dissonance and noise. I mean, I would say there's more noise than actual melodic information. And I borrowed from that as well, because I love even when it comes to rock music, I like noise too. Um, but I just felt, I could use some of that, um, but I really wanted things to be melodic for Roswell Delirium because, again, it seemed like that era of time when people were making movies, the score was melodically based most of the time, you know. So I just felt I'm better at that. I mean, anyone can kind of make noise, but it's got to be right.
Well,
Um,
well, Troy, let me ask you this. What process did you go through when creating the music score for the film? I mean, did you watch the film or the cuts that he had? Did you just watch it clean just to get a sense of the story before writing the music?
So I did watch the movie without the music, and I got to say that's hard to do for me, for a musician, um, because my attention span can wander, um, and for me, movies are wow, half of it is the score, so it's really important for me to get it right, um, and I did take a lot of care and time in figuring out what that was going to be. But yeah, I just saw it raw, and I looked at his list of references, and I was like, okay, I can figure this out. So it was a bit of a puzzle for me at first, but once I got into the flow, and once I got feedback, I was like, okay, I guess I'm on the right track. And so, um, yeah, it was a really fun experience.
Well,
I
then,
can't wait to.
if you're okay, let's say you take the film and the music score starts out at the beginning. I mean, did you just start from the opening scene and just kind of let that kind of help you create the flow to the very end?
So basically, that was one of the first things I did, first scenes that I did. And I kind of had a piece of music knocking around in my head, a chord progression. And so I just was like, I'll start here. And after watching, well, there's the first scene where Wendy's sort of contemplatively out on the porch and walking into the house where they're watching TV. That's sort of like for me, it needed to be a setup, that was sort of like, you know, kind of mellow and melodic with a little bit of dissonance. But once, you know, if you're familiar with the movie, they're watching TV and the nuclear attack is basically shown on the TV, and she runs outside and they start panicking and running. For me, that was like the juxtaposition of like the the sort of like calmness of the movie and then the intenseness. It was really quick. Um, so to me, I felt if I could nail those two um, uh, vibes, I could go from there. And so it took a couple of back and forths with Rick, um, and then we finally got to a spot where he was happy and I was happy, and then from there I just felt it just started to come out of me. It was really really fun and really cool.
So how long did it take you to score the whole film?
I believe I got the film in March of 2023. Um, and that also coincided with the launch of the Last Queen's record. So I was rehearsing for the tour and getting prepped for this album release, um, and then we went on the road during that summer, and I was literally scoring like the second two-thirds out there on the road. So luckily for me, I got to start at home, where I was in my own space, and the whole idea sort of launched from there. And so I was able to just, basically on the bus ride from Berlin to Paris, got a lot of work done. You never know what limitations can actually make for you. When you don't have everything at your fingertips, like in my studio, I've got everything I need. When all you have is your laptop and a little keyboard, you're just like, well, this is what we have. Um, so yeah, I kind of got carried away there. I forgot,
Well, no, but
forgot
it
about
came out great because, I'm thinking about this film and, because when it comes to the music score, you're doing a bit of, you have to focus the fact that it's a sci-fi film, but there is this unseen horror element to it as well. It's not like
yeah,
watching Alien. You know it's sci-fi, you know it's
yeah.
horror, or if it's Predator. But with Roswell, it's like it's sci-fi, but there's this unseen horror element that you have to mix into it. Was that the mindset?
For me, it started that way, but as I got deeper into the film, to me, it was just a very dramatic, like sad story. A sad, almost like psychological thriller because there are a lot of twists and turns, and you figure out that there's a lot of this is just going on in someone's head, and I mean, I can identify with that because that's what lots of rock music, and being in a band is. It's basically it's all in your head, and you're trying to express it, and it's very difficult to do that. And so, luckily, I have experience in doing that because to me, the story of the mother and daughter and how you end up discovering what's happening earlier in the film by the time you're at the end, just it seemed like a psychological thriller as well. So there's also this heartstring tugging that I had to tap into, when the daughter gets sick, and Mayday. Sorry, I'm thinking of the names. When Wendy, the mother, and Mayday, they start to figure out that they're on their own, in this crazy post-apocalyptic world.
Yeah, that was. I remember that scene because I've seen the film 3 times, and yeah, because it's the hospital scene.
Yes,
Yeah, and
and
but you're right. It is probably more of a psychological thriller with a side of sci-fi thrown
Sure.
in. Now, did you get to meet any of the cast?
I did. I went to a screening, and I met. It was mostly the kids that I met. They were great, you know. I mean, by the time I met them, they were already a little older. But yeah, I honestly I just went to a screening just to go, you know, to show my wife and at the end of the film, at the end of the showing, they all got up and started talking, and then Rick was like, "Okay, Troy, come on up," and I was like, "I've got nothing prepared." um, but yeah, I met them through that experience, and it was really super charming, you know. And it just seemed like everyone for this film was kind of ride or die, you know. Um, and they seemed like a little family, you know, and I love that because it's like when, you know, after working in, you know, the entertainment business over the years and years and years, that's pretty rare to find.
Yeah, yeah, I've talked with uh many of the cast members, and there's just this family element to those that were in Roswell Delirium. Now, are you going to be scoring any particular film anytime soon?
Well, I don't have plans, you know, but again, I just, you know, I took most of the last year off from touring and stuff, um, and now we're getting back into it. So I haven't been reaching out as much as I should, but you know, when it comes to Rick and when it comes to Glenn, they keep talking about projects that they want to do. So I think they have something brewing, and I'm up for it. You know, I'm up for doing more as much as possible, actually.
Oh,
So
fantastic. So
um,
now,
well, the thing I would mention is I I we just did a film for the Queens. It's called Alive in the Catacombs. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it just came out, and it's basically us playing acoustically with the string section in the catacombs of Paris last summer, and we turned that into a film, and that's you can stream it on our website, uh, qotsa.com. Um, and I believe that's the only place you can see it. We had a screening all over the world as well. You know, we did one in LA, New York, and London, and that was last month. And um, I'm pretty proud of that because it definitely feels more like a film than a performance because we were capturing how bizarrely creepy it is to play music for 6 million bones, dead, the bones of 6 million dead people. Um, um, and so to me, there's a lot of film esque, qualities of that
well,
that
yeah, because you
piece.
would have to make it very cinematic, and I bet the
Yeah,
acoustics were amazing.
the acoustics were bizarre. Yes, I mean
Really?
amazing. Yes, bizarre because you never know what you know bones are going to sound like underground.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, the
yeah,
echo or the reverb,
or the lack of. I mean,
oh, the lack of. So the
I
sound
would
wasn't
say
traveling very well, huh?
so. There was a couple of different locations that we took in the catacombs, and there was this hallway that did have less bones and more stone. That had some reflective qualities, but not to be disrespectful or anything, but you know, it it was pretty dead sounding. You know,
Well, they've been dead a long time, so I don't think
I
anybody's
know,
going
I
to
know.
complain.
I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get canceled by some of the family members and people that are down there. But anyways, my point was we didn't know what we were walking into with that experiment, and luckily it turned out as well as it did because it was bizarre. It was a very bizarre, probably the most bizarre musical experience I've ever had.
I'm gonna have to watch that because now you have me interested. I want to check that out.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I recommend it because not only am I in it, but it's definitely a departure of what we usually do. Um, and that was, we're always kind of looking to spread our wings a little bit here and there, and so that was a good experiment.
And so now Queens of the Stone Age is back on tour this summer.
Yes, sir. Yep. All throughout Europe, and then we just announced some shows that we're going to do that are more in the vein of this Catacombs idea, which is less rock band, more orchestral um, uh, elements, and so that'll be fun too. It'll be more in like theaters and like we'll try and keep it less loud and bright lights. It'll be more of like a more of a chill situation. You know.
Oh, fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, well, Roswell Delirium is being relaunched and you can watch it now on Apple TV Plus and Prime Video. And Roswell Delirium is based in the 1980s. As you heard Troy and I talk about, the U.S. is hit by a wave of nuclear attacks, and after the fallout, those that remain pretend like everything is normal, even though they are all experiencing radiation poisoning. Then a young girl named Mayday tries to make contact on a series of ham radios with her father, who is in space on a shuttle mission, but instead of making contact, she receives an intergalactic distress call from space that leads her on a journey to Space Rock, the land where Area 51 once was. For the rest of the story, you're going to have to watch the film. And Troy, I want to thank you so much for being on the program.
Oh, thank you, Lord. Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, and ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the Bondon Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel, as well as listening to us on Spotify, iTunes, and Audible, and more. And remember, you're either going to see me at the movies or on the red carpet.